we return to the chair. No, my doves, my dearest gentle kittens, this is not a rant exactly. But it is a continuation of all the things that we like talking about on this channel, and it is time to talk about season 4, part 1 of Bridgerton. Longtime online pals of mine will know this is not the first time we've talked about Bridgerton. I will link back to a video from a couple of years ago that I've referenced before, but that video was very much about the genre of romance, written romance in particular, why I thought it was important in the political, cultural, social moment that we were in at the time. This is going to be different. I'm not going to talk about the books so much except as a point of reference. This is going to be about romance as a genre on TV and how Shondaland and co have approached it. What I think the secret sauce of Bridgerton really is, why this show works, and how season 4, part 1 fits into this, with some sprinkling of a bit of a rant at the end on why Netflix is dumb for having split things up the way they did. So, strap in. We're a few years in now. Like, Bridgerton season 1 came out in 2020, and doesn't that just feel like a different time from today? Whew. When it launched, it was a genuine phenomenon, and that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. It doesn't surprise me either that the show is still going, although I do think the show has somewhat got in its own way, some of which I want to unpick in this free-form ramble that we're all going to indulge in together here today. Why did it hit the way that it did? Well, when Bridgerton season 1 came out, it was kind of genuinely unlike anything else that had landed on TV in a hot minute. And that was for a few reasons. I've been trying to figure out what the secret sauce is that made and makes Bridgerton work as well as it does. And I think I've come up with the formula. Argue with me in the comments if you disagree. But first and foremost, I think it works because it is a romance. As we've talked about before, romance as a genre is kind of unique in how it structurally gives permission to the reader or the viewer to suspend their disbelief. We don't have to nitpick everything about a book or a show to go along with it, because we, the audience, already know from the jump that what we're watching is somewhat fantastical. In fact, if the word romantasy weren't such a specific definition already, that's what I would say Bridgerton is. It is a fantasy romance in that it's not purporting and has never been purported to be based in fact. And most historical romances aren't either. Like, the jokes have been made for 50 years about how people in romance novels take baths more frequently or, have things like indoor plumbing or seem to be shockingly hairless compared to people of the age. And that's because we, the audience, know that when we read historical romance, we are not in any way contending with historical fact. Some romance subgenres and authors choose to go more into fact, to be more true to historical period. They use that to explore politics or social conventions or structures within the plots of their stories. But I have never, in my opinion, read a purely authentic historical romance that I would also comfortably classify as accurate historical fiction. They're not the same thing. They're not doing the same jobs as one another, and that's okay. The reason Bridgerton season 1 was such a hit, in my opinion, is because it knew what it was from the jump and didn't purport to be anything else. It never once claimed it was going to be historically accurate. Not once. And in fact, from the jump, from every design decision, they leaned into the fact that this wasn't just alternative history, this was a fantastical alternative history. It's not Afrofuturism, it's Afropastism in some really, really cool ways, right? By leaning in from the jump and saying, We are a fantasy. We are not real, and we are not going to make any bones about the fact that we're not trying to be real. Bridgerton set the stage for itself. It seized the narrative and didn't allow other people, the complainers or the purists of the world, to dictate the show's terms. The show set out its own terms from the jump. That was incredibly smart. It was incredibly good design and writing decisions, and it gave the show structural permission to shape the world and thereby to invite people in to just enjoy it for what it was. And it worked. I'd argue that this combination of aesthetics and world building is the first part of the Bridgerton secret sauce. Like, the aesthetics of Bridgerton are so unique and interesting and unlike anything else that's really out there. Something that is grounded in historical fact, but deviates so widely from it as to almost be happening in an alternative universe. It takes place in a world where the same racial boundaries, codes, and restrictions that we, have lived with for the last 200-300 years didn't play out the way that they did. It is a much more racially integrated society. There are nobilities and gentry of color. And I think this actually serves the conceit of the show really well because, historically speaking, the Regency takes place when the British Empire was quite literally at the height of its powers, when it was a global force. And the show leans into that by bringing a lot of ethnicities literally to London, because the show is still set in London. It's still set in high society London, and almost brings the empire home in a really cool aesthetic way. Again, we're not talking about history. We're not talking about reality. We're talking about fantasy, right? And in making that choice, it opens up worlds of possibilities when it comes to costuming, when it comes to set design, when it comes to character design. By declaring itself to be fantastical from the jump and to not be bounded by historical precedent or reality, we just get to have more fun. And the show leans into it in some really, really, really smart ways that I just eat up with a spoon. In addition to things like costuming, hair and makeup design. Oh my God, I could write a thesis on Queen Charlotte's wigs. We'll get back to that, but they're magnificent. The show also leans in and, quite famously at this point, does classical reinterpretations of pop music, which is perfect for what it is, for the genre that it is, for the gaze and the audience that it's building itself for. It's so much fun to watch because it doesn't take itself too seriously on the one hand, and yet takes its design choices incredibly seriously on the other. That combo, that aesthetic world building, alternative past, fantastical historical blend, that aesthetic, ingredient number one. Ingredient number two, the main story. We're dealing with romance, right? We're dealing with feelings, we're dealing with emotions, we're dealing with true love, as we say. So the questions that we need to ask about this is, does the story work? I've referenced this before, experienced readers know this. Romance is not one thing. Romance is a constellation of different things. There are subgenres, there are tropes, there are micro tropes within the romance genre. And if you read very widely, you'll pick up the shorthand for any of these things. Historical romance is one subcategory, but even within that, there are tropes around which common romance story beats are built. And every one of the Bridgerton siblings' books and seasons thus far is structured around a recognizable trope. So, in questioning whether the main story works, is the trope self-evident? Can we tell what it is? And is the story beat, the narrative, the pacing, the major plot points setting up and paying off against that trope in an intelligent and recognizable and satisfying way? Other criteria for me in this space: does the main character, or that was terrible grammar, do the main characters develop both as individuals, as separate identities, as separate characters of their own right, and does their relationship as a unit develop and change? i.e., do they experience growth and change? Do they, come to greater realizations about themselves, the world through which they move? Do their relationships with other characters strengthen? Do they experience growth? Like, the whole point of romance, because it is such an internal kind of genre, is about the development of the soul, if that's not too cheesy to say. Like, the whole point is that the main character has to experience growth and change. One of the satisfactions of the romance genre is that relationships, romantic, yes, but not just romantic, facilitate that growth and change. Not to get too sappy too quick into this, but one of the emotional satisfactory points of romance is that we need each other. We need other people. We need friendships. We need family. We need community. And we need partnerships in many cases to fully experience life and the joys and the pleasures that come from being a fully realized human being. I'm not saying that you need, romantic love to be satisfied or happy. I'm saying that is what romance shows as a genre. Relationships as a vehicle through which individuals experience growth and happiness. Not the only way, but a fun way. I've also mentioned this before in my other recent videos, but there always needs to be a conflict. There needs to be an obstacle, a barrier that is overcome. Depending on the genre, the subgenre, or the trope, that barrier, that obstacle is going to look very different. I'm going to try and get into this in talking about the individual seasons, but there's always something to be overcome in the romance genre. Sometimes it's internal. Sometimes a character has to overcome a challenge or a fault or a failing within. Sometimes they have to overcome an external villain or antagonist. And sometimes you're just up against society. And if that ain't relatable right now, I don't know what is. But once again, like, the way that you measure success for me in the main plot is, do we know what the tropes are? Do we know what the story beats are supposed to be? Do we recognize them when they have them? Are they satisfying? Do they make sense? Does the narrative and the pacing work? And do the characters grow and change in, again, an emotionally satisfying way along kind of the set out path for them? That's how you evaluate the main story for me. So that's ingredient number two. I said two. Which leads me very, very nicely into ingredient number three, the subplots. This actually relates to points 1 and 2, because if you're going to do successful world building, if you're going to do successful stakes building, it can't just be about two people, locked in a room having a conversation with one another. That's not a story. That's not a plot. You need other characters. You need foils off of which our main characters can bounce. You need settings and other narratives that help establish the stakes, that help us understand, the conflicts, the main conflicts in the right way, that help us appreciate the wider world building around us. And as you might be picking up, I think it's important in a well-structured narrative of any kind that if you're going to do subplots, they have to serve a purpose. They have to bolster the world building or the aesthetics that you've done at the outset, right? They help you cohesively build or reinforce the wider universe in which your story is set. Or they need to supplement the main story in an intelligent way. They need to serve, again, either as a foil or as a catalyst or as a contrast to our main plot. Oh, and we're definitely going to get back to this, but subplots can make or break a narrative. If you spend the wrong amount of time on them, if they don't tie back to the world building or the main plot in any way, if they take too much of the audience's attention, if they don't deliver, if they don't do anything, and there's no real point for them to exist, they diminish the value of the overall arching narrative. And Bridgerton does struggle with this, and I will come back to that. But well done subplots. That's ingredient number 3. And for me at least, the fourth ingredient, the final ingredient of the Bridgerton secret sauce, chemistry, baby. It has to be fun to watch. If you're gonna do romance, there has to be spice. There just has to be. There has to be spice. There has to be yearning. There has to be maybe a degree of angst. But like, if you're gonna do a sexy show, it's gotta be sexy. The main leads have to have chemistry with one another. Subplot characters need to have chemistry with one another where it's appropriate. And that chemistry, again, needs to feel authentic to the world building. It needs to feel authentic to our main characters. It needs to be tangible. If it's romance, it needs to be hot. I'm sorry. I am a pro spice person. I have said it before. I will say it again. I'm gonna say it a lot more in this video. The romance genre, whether or not it's full open door or closed, is about sex and is about pleasure and is about, relationships. So your main leads have to have it with one another. Appropriate subplot characters need to have it with one another. Even non-sexual relationships, there needs to be chemistry. So in the Bridgerton universe, you need to show siblings riffing off of one another, or you need to show friendships that matter. You need chemistry. You need the characters to mesh and to bond, because that's how you get us, the audience, to care. And yes, some of the audience are horny freaks. It's me. I'm a horny freak, but I stand by it. You need chemistry. You need the yearning. You need the spice where it's appropriate. And you need the emotional attachments where spice isn't the primary motivation. These are the four things that make Bridgerton work. Compelling world building with really beautiful aesthetics, clearly identifiable, traceable, and understandable main plots, well delivered, interesting, applicable subplots, all of which is delivered with charisma. That's Bridgerton. That's a successful season of Bridgerton. So if that's our criteria, I have no idea what my radiator just did. So if that's our criteria, how would we evaluate the previous seasons? Starting all the way back in 2020, season 1, the series opens with Daphne, the fourth Bridgerton kid, but the eldest daughter, and she's coming out into society. This is our launch into the Bridgerton world, into the Bridgerton cinematic universe. And honestly, based on this criteria, it's a pretty good season of TV. I'd argue that it's not the best. For a couple of reasons that are nitpicky. But from the jump, like, the world building is fantastic from the get-go. The character design, the set building, the world building that we get from the jump, the automatic assumptions that are built into the characters as they are delivered to us, the audience, whether that is Queen Charlotte being a woman of color, the Ton being racially integrated, we get it. We get the world that we're landing in incredibly quickly, and we, the audience, we're in it. We got it. We see what's going on. The world building is really good. I would argue that the aesthetics are kind of what lets season 1 down slightly, but I'm going to come back to that at the end. So if the world building is really strong, I'd say that the main plot is equally pretty strong. The main trope here is the fake dating trope, where two people are going to pretend to be in a relationship to fool the nearest and dearest around them, to facilitate their own goals. In the case of Daphne Bridgerton, she wants to marry. She's been raised for that in the context of this world. She wants to have a family. That's what she wants out of life. Her counterpoint, our main male hero, is Simon, the Duke of Hastings, who doesn't want to get married, and his whole backstory gives him reason for that. But these two people decide, okay, we're the hottest people in London this season, to which, accurate, we're going to use one another to facilitate our goals. Simon's going to help Daphne find a husband. Daphne's going to help Simon avoid other ladies who are on the hunt for a husband. Great. That's the trope. If you're a romance reader or viewer, you understand that there's going to be certain story beats that come from that. Do Simon and Daphne have chemistry? Oh boy, do they. My God, those actors are beautiful. Like, sex and pleasure are built into their dynamic. Simon is a man about town. He's friends with Antony, the eldest Bridgerton sibling, who is a bit of a rake. Daphne, hilariously, being a gentlewoman of her time, doesn't know anything about sex and pleasure. This is a recurring theme in the Bridgerton universe, which is, you know, handled with a great deal of humor, I think, and very, very satisfyingly done. All of the puns intended. Daphne experiences romantic sexual pleasure awakenings through her initially friendship and then eventual, you know, marriage with Simon, which are very funny to watch. And we, the audience, get to giggle and kick our feet as she learns about things like self-pleasure and needs some biology lessons from the maids about how babies are made, which is really funny once you consider that she is one of 8 children. But, you know, again, the humor is built into the show. All of which is to say is there's chemistry. There's great chemistry between the characters. Their personal chemistry is built into their plot points together. It is built into the understanding and delivery of the trope and its narrative. It works. Not only that, we get chemistry for the side characters. Antony, the rake, has a hot and steamy relationship with a mistress, which is a lot of fun to watch. The Bridgerton siblings banter off of one another. So, you know, the family dynamics are very fun to watch. Like, the relational elements of this show are set out really, really well, both in our main plot and our subplot. Speaking of, those subplots, they make sense. They work within the context of the world and they work to further the main plot. So for in this case, Daphne has some other suitors. One of them is a really, really gross, lecherous kind of dude who is trying to pressure Antony into betrothing Daphne to him, and at one point, you know, comes on to Daphne in a really gross way, which allows Simon to defend her honor, and we get some satisfying punches in on him. Great stuff. So that is a subplot that makes sense in the context of the world building of a historical drama where rules and mores around courtship and even arranged marriages are very much a thing. But it also allows the main characters to come to one another's defense, to be in confrontation with Antony, who, as kind of the head of the family, is responsible for his siblings. And we see in his character development that that responsibility really weighs on him. And he wants to do right by his siblings, but doesn't always know what that means. Whatever. There's another suitor that comes through, one of Queen Charlotte's nephews from Germany. And this makes sense again in the context of the world building. Queen Charlotte wants to arrange brilliant matches for her own amusement. And, you know, she's declared that Daphne is the diamond of the season, and therefore she wants her to make a brilliant match because that's how the queen entertains herself for reasons that we'll come back to. But, you know, by being courted by another person, that you know, inflames Simon's jealousy, blah, blah, blah. It furthers the main plot. I mentioned that Antony has a mistress, Sienna. That's actually a really good subplot too, because it sets up the sequence of events, emotionally speaking, for the next season. This is also something I'm going to come back to, but the conflict and the desires and the guilt that Antony experiences by having a mistress who he clearly has feelings for, but feeling so constrained by his position and the requirements of him as a gentleman and head of the family, is very, very integral to his character development and therefore his future storyline. And then, of course, more widely across the street, there's the Featheringtons and all of their shenanigans. The Featheringtons are kind of the foil to the Bridgerton family. The Bridgerton family is, you know, very tasteful and respectable. They like each other. That's an important part of the world building narrative, is that the Bridgerton family is kind of unusual in that they like one another and they care about one another and they enjoy one another's company. We see all throughout the rest of the series that is not the default. And indeed, just across the street, the Featheringtons, they love each other, but they don't necessarily like each other all of the time. And Mama Featherington, Lady Featherington, has no sons and is responsible for launching her children out onto the world. And that is her only mission in life. And she's a great character. Oh golly, and her character design, going back to aesthetics, are so fun because the Featheringtons, particularly steered by Lady Featherington, are tacky. Their colors are bright and loud and neon. They're gaudy. Their silhouettes of their costumes are, a bit wacky and out there. That's clearly just like a fun set of characters to work on. But the subplots that happen across the street are also integral to the main plot, both of season 1 and the wider Bridgerton cinematic universe. Particularly the arrival of a distant cousin, Marina Hyde, who, again, if you know the wider world of the books, sets up future seasons of this show and future relationships. Specifically, Colin's development, because Penelope Featherington, who is, spoiler alert, revealed to be Lady Whistledown, the raconteur, the framing device for this whole series. If you're watching this video, you know who she is. I'm not going to go into that until a little bit later in this rant, so just sit with me for now. But Penelope is in love with Colin Bridgerton and has kind of loved him from afar from her whole life. So Marina coming into town, Colin starts to court her, which sets up some tensions there. That romance doesn't pay off, but again, starts the wheels turning for future seasons' storylines, not just for Colin, but also for Eloise, because Marina ends up married to a man named Sir Philip Crane, who, at least in the world of the books, is Eloise's future love interest. All of which is to say, the subplots further the main plot in this season and further the plot of the Bridgerton cinematic universe very, very successfully. For 8 episodes of television, they pack a lot in, but it makes sense, the narrative works, and the pacing. The one thing that I don't love about season 1 of Bridgerton, all things considered, is I don't think they got the aesthetics just right. Which I don't hold against them for the first season of television, when they were clearly doing something a little bit, wild and wacky and fantastical. I think that when you look at all of the Bridgerton content that we have to date, season 1 is a little bit uneven. It doesn't get the balance right between historical period piece and historical kind of fantasy. By which I mean some of the costumes, not in the Featherington space, but in the Bridgerton space, they're too historical for this world, i.e. They're a little bit frumpier, might be the way of putting it. I'm thinking specifically of like a dressing gown that Violet Bridgerton, Lady Bridgerton, wears in season 1, which looks very historically accurate. But when you compare it to a lingerie set that she just wore in season 4, doesn't look like they happened in the same show, right? And the season 4 lingerie set is more historical fantasy. And the nightgown is more historical period piece, and Bridgerton isn't a period piece, so I think that that's wrong. Does that make sense? Also, some of the silhouettes in season 1 are a little bit weird. There's a tendency in Regency designs to raise, so the bust level of a Regency dress falls just beneath the breast. But for some reason, some people, when they do Regency dresses, bring it up so that the seam for the bust cuts across the breast. This happens all the time in Bridgerton season 1, and every time it shows up on my screen, it just makes me want to gnash my teeth. I don't know why I hate it so much, but I do. It's just wrong, and I think it's ugly. The other thing is that the hairstyles got a little bit weird. Things like women wearing their hair down is weird to me, again, in the context of this world, because if you're trying to do costumes that are more like a historical period piece, which season 1 was trying to do in most cases, it really clashed, I thought, with some of the aesthetic choices around, hair being worn down, or some of the accessories. Basically, I don't think they got the balance of costuming and grooming right. Even very silly things like, Anthony in season 1 looks more like Colin Firth in the A&E version of Pride and Prejudice, in that he has bushier hair and sideburns, which is period accurate if you were doing a historical period piece, but not if you're doing a fantasy piece. I think that they pivoted away from this in season 2, and I think it serves the story better. Speaking of which,